This man opens a safe buried in the backyard. Then police come knocking on his door. Matthew Emanuel, his wife, and son have been calling their beautiful Todt Hill, Staten Island house their home for almost half a decade. They knew every nook and cranny of the area, save for this one partially buried box in their backyard. Nobody really dared to explore it, or perhaps they weren't really that interested in doing so. Regardless, that rusty old box was allowed to sit there for years, with rust thickening as time passed. But its unattended state would soon change when a huge storm hit the town and destroyed much of the Emanuels' yard. As this forced them to renovate, it also meant finally dealing with that mysterious box. So they called a professional landscaper to get the job done and try to find out what that mysterious container held inside. What happened next was a series of high and low points for the family that eventually led to the police stepping in. Matthew, his wife Maria, and their son have spent the last 4 years at this lovely house, so naturally, they knew every nook and cranny the property has to offer. Some parts of the house had already gone through renovations, but much of the architectural design remained preserved. They bought it when it was an old house, and they wanted to keep its original beauty while still ensuring that it met their modern needs. Though some parts of the house had already seen some landscaping applied to them, there was this antique-looking metal box in one corner that they did not try to move at all. Half of it was buried, and they really didn't think much of it, thinking it was totally harmless and uneventful. They also didn't think it would set off a chain of events that would bring a shock to all. When they bought the house, it came with the mystery of the half-buried rusty box. However, it really wasn't treated as anything close to mysterious by the Emanuels. It was just sitting there, and nobody even bothered to try to see what it held inside, if anything. In fact, all around it were some vines of poison ivy and weeds, which was another reason why none wanted to explore it. They had even started to throw mulch over the area. In short, that box was considered part of the backyard feature, and they didn't see anything out of the ordinary by its presence. This all changed one day when a storm came to ravage the area. It was one of the highest snowstorms ever to hit Staten Island for decades, and many were unprepared for the damage it brought upon homes and property. The Emanuels' yard took a huge hit as the trees near their fence fell and damaged a large part of their area. Matthew's family was forced to stay inside for several days until the strong winds and heavy snowfall died down, but they were also thankful that they remained safe through it all. Their yard, however, was another story. Eventually, when spring came, it was time to head out and deal with the damage that unfolded outside. Serious renovations were necessary for their yard. Amongst all the debris, there was one thing that somehow stood out. The rusty metal box had come out of obscurity and commanded their attention. The box everyone had been ignoring for half a decade had finally surfaced, as if calling people to come look. The yard needed plenty of work after the storm, and when the box made itself known even more, they had no choice but to get it out and inspect it. Perhaps one of the reasons why the snowstorm happened was to finally let the Emanuels know what the mystery backyard box held inside. When the springtime revealed that their yard would be needing serious renovation work and the help of professionals, it also made prominent its presence. Given the amount of work that needed to be done, Matthew knew there was only one person to call who was an expert on the matter, the landscaper known as Bamboo Bob. It was the latter and his team who was tasked to unearth the metal box, and what they discovered later was nothing they could have ever prepared for. Bamboo Bob is named so because of his stunning landscape work all over New Jersey and New York, particularly when using bamboo as primary materials. His real name is Robert Foley, and Matthew had heard of his work through friends and local media. He had always been excited over getting the opportunity to work with the artist, and now the time has really come. Matthew knew what he wanted to do with his yard and told Bamboo Bob's team about his vision. He had wanted to create a line of bamboo plants along the side of his property. One key reason is to keep wandering animals out, which is quite common in Staten Island. Deer especially hate bamboo, so having these lined up on the perimeter will help ensure that they don't get in. When Bamboo Bob arrived to survey the location, his eyes landed upon the strange-looking metal box that was protruding from the ground. He wondered what it was and was surprised by Matthew's answer. Given Bamboo Bob's vast experience landscaping different types of property, seeing things partially or completely buried in the ground was nothing surprising. After all, digging was part of their task as landscapers, so what they saw at the Emanuels, while sparked their curiosity, didn't set off any alarms. However, he was surprised at the owner's response when he asked about it. All this time, Matthew had thought it was an electrical box, which is probably why he didn't bother to tinker with it. But he couldn't have been more wrong. When they finally opened it, jaws dropped. Bob's crew made a plan to remove the box carefully from the ground in case it held something fragile or would fall apart in the process. When they laid the entire thing on the surface, it was clear that it was not an electrical box. One of his men inspected more closely to find cracks or any sort of opening to figure out what was inside. At first, while trying to pry it open, they thought it would hold just random items. When the door opened, however, they held out a collective gasp. It was a safe. It had a dial on one side, which stunned the team even more. There was something weird and special about this rusty box they had just unearthed. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been locked. The safe was roughly 2 feet across and 1.5 feet tall, weighing around 100 pounds. Despite its heavy weight, Matthew was determined to find out its contents. After all, he wasted 4 years not knowing a thing. Bamboo Bob and his team stood around the garden as they watched Matthew attempt to shift the safe around. He wanted to see if he could hear any of the safe's contents jostling around inside. He didn't get far, but his efforts didn't stop there. Even with all the shifting, Matthew didn't hear a thing coming from inside the safe. That didn't necessarily mean it was empty though. With the help of his landscaping team, he hoisted the safe up to the deck for further inspection. The landscapers then went back to work reconstructing the garden while Matthew concocted a plan. He grabbed a pickaxe and smashed it into the safe. It worked, and he was able to peer inside the box, and what he saw gave him chills. The safe contained real-life treasure. Matthew Emanuel could hardly believe what he was seeing. Inside the safe were stacks of $100 bills, each bundle at least 3 inches thick. There were also zipped plastic bags containing hundreds of valuables. Chunks of gold, jade, earrings, jewels, and diamond rings were among the findings. They had literally stumbled upon a real-life treasure in Matthew's own backyard, right there among the fallen trees and destroyed garden. But there was one small issue. Even though he finally figured out the true purpose of the old rusted box in the backyard, there was a problem. The safe was not waterproof, and many of the bills were severely damaged from years of neglect and exposure to the New York elements. The cash was squished together from bad water damage, and Matthew realized that he had to work quickly if he had any chance of saving some of the money. You won't believe it, but there was more to be found in the safe. Matthew set to work trying to salvage what he could of the water-damaged money, pulling bills apart and setting them aside to dry. The project was tedious and took several days. As he soon discovered, he wasn't able to save a large chunk of the treasure. The bills were falling apart and were too ruined to be counted as legal currency. Even excluding the ruined bills, Matthew never expected the sum of the dried bills. After everything was said and done, there was roughly $5,000 worth of bills that Matthew was unable to save. But then there was the rest of it. Albeit slightly faded, the newly dried cash came out to be $16,300. That's not even counting what the jewels are worth. Now that Matthew salvaged what he could from the safe, the mystery was over, right? Wrong. There was more that he had yet to learn about the mysterious safe. Even though it was exciting for Matthew and his family to find a real-life treasure, he was suspicious about how the safe came to be in the backyard. He felt as though it couldn't be someone's personal belongings, as they put it in a non-weatherproof safe and forgot about it either. Although many people wouldn't care about the safe's origin, simply pocketing the findings and moving on, Matthew wasn't finished. He believed there was something potentially illegal going on. After searching through the safe, he found his answer. Now that the money was dried, Matthew's next task was to take inventory of the rest of the riches. The amount of gold that was inside the safe was incredible, and Matthew had to take out his kitchen scale just to make note of it all. While he was in the middle of calculating and logging the rest of the safe's contents, Matthew stumbled across something in one of the plastic bags that would change everything. The address found could be for any number of locations, but Matthew was hopeful that it led to the owner of the safe's contents. After all, the address wouldn't lead to the actual criminal. That would be ridiculous. What he found during his GPS search left him shocked. The address was closer than he ever could have imagined. As it turned out, the address listed on the paper was very close by, enough so that Matthew wouldn't even have to take his car. The owner of the old rusted safe's contents wasn't only on Staten Island, but happened to be residing in the same neighborhood. It dawned on Matthew that he had passed the house before, every time he walked his dog as a matter of fact. It was then that Matthew knew what he had to do. Matthew Emanuel couldn't keep the contents of the safe to himself, not after he found the address. It wasn't his property after all. So, on April 30th, 2018, 2 days after opening the safe and discovering its contents, Matthew walked over to the address he found scrawled on the piece of paper. He had no idea who was going to answer the door or if they were even the true owners of the safe's contents. Worst case scenario, if this meeting went downhill, he could get the police involved. So he knocked. Matthew had no way of knowing who was going to open the door or what was going to happen during the very strange conversation revolving around the potential crime. Even so, he didn't expect an elderly woman to open the door. Not wanting to be rude, Matthew introduced himself and got right to it. He even went as far as to ask the already hesitant older woman a question. "Have you ever been robbed before?" She immediately started shaking, a reaction Matthew was not prepared for. You'll never guess the woman's story. Matthew wasn't sure if the woman was shaking due to excitement or pure terror. As it turns out, she confirmed Matthew's suspicions. She had indeed been robbed before. He couldn't believe the story she was telling him about what happened years prior. The night after Christmas 2011, a burglar broke into her home. By the time she and her husband had woken up, the criminal was long gone. The person had vanished, along with $52,000 worth of money and jewelry. Although Todt Hill was considered to be an affluent part of Staten Island, it has a frightening past. At the time of the elderly woman's 2011 robbery, there was a masked person prowling the streets of the town. The press called him the Ninja Burglar because of his stealth and surprising success rate. From 2005 to 2015, the Ninja Burglar robbed over 200 homes across Connecticut, New York, and New Jersey, 160 of those robberies being in Staten Island, many of which were in Todt Hill. Could this be his doing? In 2015, the authorities arrested a man named Robert Costanzo in Staten Island. He had a criminal past and was in court for something unrelated to the burglaries when he was finally charged with the break-ins. It took 2 years, but Costanzo finally received a sentence of 22 years in prison. Although many people could sleep easier knowing he was behind bars, the elderly lady Matthew found had long lost hope. Police told her that she was most likely never going to see her belongings again. Now that he knew this old lady had been robbed a few years back, Matthew had no choice but to bring her to his home. He wanted to see if she'd be able to identify any of the jewelry. He was truly amazed by how fast everything was falling into place. It's unfortunate that the safe had been sitting in the backyard for all these years. Now he was so close to unraveling the mystery, and only after 2 days. The moment the elderly lady saw the jewelry and stacks of cash on the counter, she was overcome with emotion. She instantly started to cry and shake, all while hugging Matthew. Now they both knew the truth. For 6.5 years, she had lived with the trauma of having some stranger in her home while she slept, losing her valuables, and being told over and over that she would never see them again. And you'll never guess what Matthew does next. Matthew Emanuel returned all of the safe's contents to its rightful owner. What started off as an old rusted box covered in poison ivy and foliage, and pretty much forgotten, had suddenly turned into a momentous occasion in a mere few days. With the help of a bad winter, hungry deer, and a curious landscaper called Bamboo Bob, Matthew was able to help a lady reclaim some of the lost valuables that were wrongfully taken from her, solving something that the police were unable to for more than 6 years. In his mind, there was no question of what he was going to do with the safe's contents. Every piece of jewelry and each of the bills he carefully separated and dried out were going to their true owner, his elderly neighbor. He also refused any type of award for returning the stolen items. He told the press that the only reward he could hope for was good karma. After all, he was doing the right thing. But he did make sure to do something so he never forgot. The event. There was only one thing Matthew and his family had to do. Bamboo Bob had finished the backyard and the safe was back with its true owner. He and his family decided to commemorate the entire experience by placing a tiny ceramic elephant in the backyard by the bamboo. He wanted to mark the spot of the safe, the memory of the mysterious box that was part of their yard for 4 years, and as a reminder that real-life mysteries can be solved and that treasure could be sitting right under your nose.